Hi, I'm just going to go through some of my notes from the webinar the other night that we did about thinking skills and higher order thinking skills and critical thinking and so on. So my part of the webinar was focused on how I'm teaching thinking skills at the moment. So I'll just move on here. All right, so as some people have been discussing in the group, general ability is now gone. And it's going to be in OC still this year. It's still called General Ability, but I think that'll be the end of the particular name of General Ability, and it'll be replaced by Thinking Skills. Now, a lot of people are sort of quite panicked about what this means, what it entails for the questions going forward. So I looked at a lot of the literature that the New South Wales Department of Education has been putting out there, and they seem to identify thinking skills as consisting of these 5 specific domains. So critical thinking, that would be the big one, I would say, the all-encompassing one. Creative thinking, even though I would say critical thinking is most important of all, there is this sort of popularity around the word creative, which we'll probably discuss when we get to that. But yeah, in a lot of the literature and in the media, for example, in the Sydney Morning Herald article the other day, it really had a specific focus on creative thinking as being very separate from critical thinking. Computational thinking, so that's where I think they're getting your maths skills into thinking skills. So, and they want to be very sort of explicit about being able to think in a way that a computer would think, because they sort of foresee everything as heading towards AI oriented. AI being artificial intelligence. Ethical reasoning, it's another big one, in society at the moment, that, you want these people who are considered to be smart or gifted or whatever term you want to use to actually be using ethical reasoning. So being concerned with what's right and wrong. And metacognition, thinking about, why you're doing certain things. And that is a very important one for students to improve their own learning and take control of their learning. All right, so critical thinking. So earlier in the webinar, we had Janelle from Janison on, and she talked a lot about the higher order thinking skills, Bloom's taxonomy, and so on, which is basically just showing you how you're moving from lower order thinking skills like remembering to all the way up to creating, basically creating being the highest form of higher order thinking skill. So critical thinking to me, and the way I teach it, is using logic, right? And not using your logic, just using logic, general logic. That can be accessed by everyone, and has to be accessible to everyone and to be able to be defined by everyone as being logic, because otherwise you have no hope in an argument. If you're discussing an issue with someone and they just don't even agree with your definition of what logic is, well, yeah, of course, you're not going to be able to come to an agreement. Identifying fallacies, so mistakes, assumptions, so things you already are taking as true before they've been established within arguments. So yeah, even in the media article the other day in the Sydney Morning Herald, there's so many assumptions in there. And I read through it with the thinking skills class the other day, and I have quite a few smart students who were able to quickly identify the fallacies and assumptions within those articles. Differentiating between objectivity and subjectivity is a very important one for children. They tend to take everything they read as being true, which would be very dangerous today. So reading those articles in the Sydney Morning Herald are a really good example, because the children know about these issues. They know they go to school and they go to tutoring and they do these different tests and so on. So they can quickly discern that a lot of the things being said by the media are not correct, because the media are not in that context. They're just making assumptions. They're like, oh yeah, tutoring's bad. That's just straight away, that's taken as given. And school is wonderful, taken as given. Or again, a lot of kids who go to tutoring would say something like, I don't learn anything at school. So there's a a big paradox there that, you know, the children themselves, when we're supposed to value what they say and what they believe, you know, and then they'll quickly denigrate something, and then it's like, oh no, 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 but they don't know what they're talking about when they say that. But yeah, a lot of kids are so far ahead of the level they're at school that school's basically obsolete for them, which is why they want to go to selective, right? They want to be around people where they can be pushed and they can, you know, do a lot of homework, go to tutoring, extend themselves. All right, tasks to facilitate critical thinking, especially critical reading, all right, reading of something and being able to infer and figure out what's going on there. Read a wide array of texts, especially news media. So yeah, we do a lot of that in class actually. Read allegories and metaphorical texts. So if you're not sure what an allegory is, I actually talked about one on the Facebook group the other day when I actually thought about this whole situation. And I thought, well, this is very relevant to Aesop's fable of the tortoise and the hare, because it seems like people are sort of turning against the idea of hard work being good. You know, that slow and steady wins the race. They don't want slow and steady. Of course, no one who is slow is going to get into selective. I don't think so. It's almost like they don't even want someone who's just, you know, reasonably gifted and works hard. They just want the ultra genius to get in, which they might be surprised at how many of those really high IQ children actually are hard workers as well, because I find there's quite a correlation there. So yeah, the allegory of the tortoise and the hare, the meaning seems to have changed over time. It's as though the department wants to celebrate the hare. They want to help the hare. You know, they want the person who doesn't have to try, who can just win easily. Which again, to me, it doesn't seem to be the way society is thinking at the moment. Society seems to want to help the disadvantaged, and even the literature the department puts out, they want to talk about helping all of these disadvantaged groups who probably aren't hares. So I don't understand it in that sense. It's that idea of cognitive dissonance, which you can again relate to an Aesop's fable, the fox and the grapes. You know, it's the people who don't get into selective. They then proceed to say it was too easy or something, or they never wanted to go anyway. So, and read lots of metaphorical texts. Now, I find this is a good way to delineate between the really good reader, the critical reader, and someone who's just basically literally decoding texts. So I have a number of stories where, you know, if you don't pay attention to the small detail, the minutiae within a story, you're not going to understand it. And I've already started testing this in my classes in thinking skills. I'm finding, you know, with these good stories that I have, you'll find 1 out of 10 students will understand it. And then you'll even ask that student, how come you're the only one who understood it? And no, they think it's easy. They're like, I don't understand how everyone else didn't see it. So it's really a great way to separate between students, and it's abstract reasoning, big skill of abstract reasoning, I think, which you need to have in critical thinking and critical reading. Right, so this is the type of question we look at a lot in class, in my thinking skills classes at the moment. This question revolves around doctors who treated patients during the plague, and it gives you some statistics, and then it gives you a conclusion that it's actually safer for doctors to treat patients with the plague because less of them died. So I think this is a pretty good question because it's using statistics in quite a misleading way. That would probably be this evidence would probably be quite compelling to a student who's just reading it at face value. But I already can see, and when you do other versions of this question, when you give someone, you know, the president promised to stop unemployment, but 12 million people are unemployed, so he lied. You know, is this true? What's the assumption? And the smart student can see 12 million's meaningless as a figure. You need it as a percentage. And then you need to be able to even correlate that percentage. You're like, well, what is unemployment historically? Right, so you could actually say, you know, in terms of if that was America, that's possibly low unemployment, right? With 12 million out of a population of what, 350 or something, it's a very low percentage. So this is a similar sort of question you need to be asking. Well, yeah, you know, what's the circumstances? How many people had the plague? what percentage of doctors are, treating plague sufferers. And so the correct answer would be comparing death rates per 1,000 members of each group. And it's not that it has to be specifically 1,000 like the number. It just has to be a death rate there rather than a flat figure of, because if you just look at those figures, you'll say, yeah, well, more than twice as many people died not treating plague sufferers, so it must be safer. And to use the analogy, which is, looking at patterns, it's comparing apples and oranges. People always say that in arguments. They say you can't compare those two things, they're apples and oranges. Right? But even that, to a child, they would probably think, no, but an apple and an orange, they're both spherical objects, they're both fruits, right? They have quite a lot in common. So you really have to pay attention to the small details there. So this type of question is very good to get children to think about. Impossible to sort of rote learn, I think, how to answer this, because you could have another question like this dealing with statistics that is absolutely the opposite. You could show the percentages or something, and the percentages don't work in that context in comparison to the numbers. I see that. I saw that in some advertising for a tutoring center the other day. 23% improvement by students, and it's like, yeah, how many students is it? Is it one student? Like you had 99% improvement. Again, did you have one student? Did you have 1,000,000 students? The number is meaningless on its own. All right, then we move on to the one that is becoming very ubiquitous, creative thinking. So lateral thinking, thinking outside of the box. Innovative, that'll be another word you'll hear a lot of. Problem-solving skills. Counterintuitive thinking, so thinking of problems, that your first instinct, your first intuition is to try and solve it this way, but actually you need to do it a new way. And abstract reasoning, which is why I included this picture of, you can see the horse head in the meal, in the food there, which apparently some people cannot see it, right, because they don't have powerful abstract reasoning perception. And that's not a case of, being right or wrong. It's just some people will see it. If you read the book I talk about a lot, Flowers for Algernon, Charlie Gordon has a really low IQ. He's the protagonist of that story. And yeah, he wouldn't be able to see this either. Right? He would just look at it and he'd say, what do you see in there, Charlie? And he would get quite upset and, wonder why he can't see it. Actually, in the text, he goes to get his glasses. He says, I'll be able to see it better if I put my glasses on. And of course, it doesn't help him to see it at all. Right, so this is a sample question of a creative thinking type problem. All right, you have a 3-litre and a 5-litre water container. Each container has no markings except for that which gives you its total volume. You also have a running tap. You must use the containers and the tap in such a way as to exactly measure out 4 litres of water. How is this done? So I've tested this one in my classes. Yeah, a lot of children struggled with it, okay, because it's not readily apparent how you would get 4 litres. Right? But actually, once you've seen this problem and once you've done a problem like this a few times, it'll probably open up the gateway to solving that type of problem in future. So you can actually solve it in a couple of ways by filling up either jug. I'll explain the 5-litre one. If we fill up the 5-litre one, the bigger one, we fill it all the way up to 5 litres. We empty as much as we can into the 3-litre jug. That leaves 3 litres in there, and we've got 2 litres left in the 5-litre jug. We empty the 3-litre. We say, as part of the question, you can get rid of any excess water you don't need. You empty the 3-litre. It's now empty. You move the 2 litres that is in the 5-litre over to the 3-litre. Right, so there's 2 litres in here in the 3-litre. The 5-litre is now empty. Fill the 5-litre up again. It's got 5 in it. You've got 2 in this one. You empty whatever you can from the 5 over to the 3, which is another 1. Right? You move 1 from there. This is full. It's got 3 in it. What's left in this one? 4. All right. So that's how you solve it that way. That's one way to do it. You can do it the other way as well, filling up the 3. Okay. But yeah, again, a good delineator of problem-solving skills that probably only 1 in 10 students I had at the moment is able to solve that question. All right, this one is another really tricky one. I don't think anyone solved this one in any of my classes. Right, so you're given some analogous equations. 628 equals 112 plus 819. 129 equals 911 plus 505. Which, you would, if you were adding these up, what's this? 931. This is 1,416. What number is missing from the sum below? 209 plus 912. All right, that's 1121. I've put that in the answer, So the really rote learner might skim the question and be like, yeah, maybe it's not. All right, so the things you would want to identify in this question are that you would want to ask, why did they use this font, right? Is there any reason for that? Why are the numbers expressed in that way? I don't think any students of mine really did that. That's what should be jumping out at you. Why did they use that font, and what does that mean for the numbers there? So if you're watching this now, do you have any idea of what you would do? All right, remembering we're focusing on creative thinking. All right, so what you do is you turn it upside down. And then you see all of the numbers are still numbers. So now it's 216 plus 602. And if we look at the other equations, 505 plus 116 equals 621. 618 plus 221 equals 829. So we're just adding them up. 216 plus 602, it's the 818. And some of the children in my classes were actually quite angry about this problem. Oh, that's not fair. That's a trick. And I'm like, yeah, that's basically what creativity is. It's like coming up with looking at things differently, having a different perspective. So for them to respond that way is also not good, because it sort of shows that a lot of them are rote learners in a way. Yeah, they don't want to have to look at things a new way. They do want to be stuck in the way they're thinking of being able to solve things easily. Right, which is, whereas, if you were really interested in being a creative thinker, you would reflect on that, you would use your metacognition, and you would say, wow, I've learned a new way to look at things there. All right, computational thinking. You can relate that to critical reading because you need to understand probability and data. All right, if you just have those laid out in front of you, you can be easily tricked by them if you're not able to extrapolate from the data. Extrapolate was a word that was shown in the higher order thinking skills as well that I use a lot. That's very important. Right, constructing algorithms rather than just providing an answer. So I see this one as being quite important in computational thinking and also in mathematical reasoning. A lot of times kids will come up with an answer for something, but they're not able to articulate how they got that answer. So say you got a pattern like this, you're given a relationship between a set of variables. What is the answer? So the relationship is, I'll just say it, I think it's divide the first number, well, I've written the algorithm down. Divide the first number by 3, times 2, add 8. It's quite a complex one, right? I wouldn't expect many people would be able to figure that out very quickly, right? But test that. Divide by 3, 3 times 2, 6 plus 8. Divide by 3, 8 times 2, 16 plus 8, 24. Let's try it on that one. 15 divided by 3, 5 times 2, 10 plus 8, 18. Answer is 18. So then, even if you figured that out, now you've got to be able to put that into an algorithm form. So it would be something like x over 3 times 2 plus 8 equals y. And they might even express that differently. They might put the 2 at the front, use brackets in there as well. Again, so to see if someone's able to sort through the logic of how you would work out an equation like that. I think that is more valuable to actually be able to think in that algorithm form, because that's what a computer does, right? So if you're going to be working with AI, you don't want to just be able to recognize patterns and solve them without being able to specify what the algorithm is, because the computer only really needs the algorithm, right? And then it can apply it to any problem. Right, ethical reasoning. Look, I've been doing a lot of work on this with my students over the years because I see this as being really ascendant within the hierarchy of what society wants right now out of its citizens, basically. So it's closely linked to the advent of artificial intelligence, so AI. So we read a lot of sort of science fiction, speculative science fiction on AI. Isaac Asimov is a bit of a master of those stories. He's come up with some great, we've got the US election going on right now. He's got a great story. I think it is called Election, where you no longer have, people having to vote. You have some AI that interviews one person, just a random person, and asks you a set of questions. It's via a lottery, and that person gets picked, ask you all these questions. What do you want out of this? What do we do with this? Blah, blah, blah. And then the AI extrapolates from that what would be the best result. And so I could actually see that happening one day. I could see AI taking over that type of thing for us, which, and again, then you get into your philosophical thinking, which is like, well, would that be wrong for AI to take over? Perhaps that will be better, right? But it should make better decisions than humans make. Humans don't make good decisions all the time. Humans are biased. So if we could get AI to help us to facilitate what we're doing, but again, this is all just thought experiments. Okay, so I do a lot of that with students in terms of ethical reasoning. So lots of dilemmas. What would you do in this case where both outcomes are potentially bad, and trying to figure out which one does the least harm. Utilitarianism, ideas like that. I find smart children are really interested in thinking like this. Often they're already thinking like this, and they just don't realize that, it's all been thought out for them over since the Enlightenment. Lots of philosophers discussing these types of issues. So texts that look at an ethical or social issue, they are very prevalent in the world today. I even encourage students when they're doing their writing, try to include some ethical perspective there, because of ethical reasoning being something that is being looked at. If you can show you're an ethical reasoner, you don't write your violent stories where there's just wanton violence for no reason. No one's going to think that that's an ethical issue, at least until you get a bit older, right? Then you could possibly discuss. Like one ethical issue I saw, sort of when COVID started was, some people were opining that the world would be better without us, would be better without humans. And, for a philosopher, there is a lot of ethical sense to that, but it might be difficult for children to understand that. Arguing both sides of an issue is a very important one, and that's something I really encourage students to do in every argument. We use this quote from John Stuart Mill. I know I put a lot of quotes from John Stuart Mill. And basically, he is the progenitor of utilitarianism. Just a great orator, fantastic rhetoric. It would be very hard for anyone to repudiate this statement, I would think, if they wanted to be known as a reasonable and logical thinker. He has another one where he says, even if one person has a different opinion to everyone else, you would be no more right in silencing that one person than that one person would be right in silencing everyone else. And it's just fantastic rhetoric, great thinker. So no matter what the topic, and this is a big problem I see in the world today, is that, say you get a topic, like a controversial topic, like the gender pay gap. I see teachers come in and just teach the children. They don't teach them, they just indoctrinate them. They just say, there's this gender pay gap. It's really unfair for women. Blah, blah, blah. Here's your reasons. Write it down, right? And without looking at the other side at all. So when I do that issue, for example, we look at both sides. We look at economics. Right? We look at what if you even remove gender. I give some very interesting examples where I say, here, I'll write stories for the children, and they always enjoy them. They say, oh, that's such a good writer. That story was so interesting. Why don't you write books and so on? And I'm like, I'm not really. I don't have any interesting ideas really. But I will say sometimes I'll show them some children's author who they think is famous, and I'll say, do you think they're a really good writer? And they say, yeah, they must be, because they sell so many copies. I say, all right, I'm actually going to say I think I can write better than this person, but I don't make any money out of writing. And they say, yeah, well, you must not be better than them because otherwise you would sell more. And it's then like, well, let's look at music, for example. Let's look at whoever is #1, in the music charts at the moment, and whoever it is, and would say, so are they more talented than Mozart? Or are they more talented than Beethoven? And then they sort of think about it a little bit differently. They say, yeah, that seems a different case, because, for whatever reason, Mozart and Beethoven are not so popular these days. But it does get them to think about it. And that's another skill in observing patterns. So saying just because something is popular doesn't mean it's correct, right? Or it has merit or so on. So for someone to just look at, say, an issue like the gender pay gap, and I'm very aware it's a very controversial topic, but if you're really going to be serious about ethical reasoning and logical thinking and critical thinking, you got to look at both sides of that issue. So often many of the examples that are given, they're just economics topics. They're not ethics topics. They are, it's supply and demand. It's like people want to buy this, therefore it's more popular, right? And that has nothing to do with gender. And then you could give examples again. Who's the highest paid author in the world? J.K. Rowling, right? And she's a woman. So, and I would be very, very hard pressed to say that she is the best writer in the world. I don't think anyone would argue that she is. I often use her as an example. It's not to say that she isn't a talented writer or whatever, but yeah, I don't think any rational person would say she's the best writer in the world. So yeah, ethical reasoning, looking at both sides. Yeah, I'm very sort of careful not to push my own views. So in the gender pay gap issue, yeah, we look at compelling reasons on both sides. Right? But I actually think most children come to think, no, there isn't really that gap. It's more a case of supply and demand economics. And sure, you can then argue that economics is bad and capitalism is bad. And then you get into another argument, and you look at capitalism versus communism and so on. See, the problem for the kids is that most of them will say that capitalism is better. So once they look at both sides, they want to be rewarded for their hard work and so on. So then they kind of have to refute the gender pay gap because that sort of aligns more closely with a socialist view of just giving this to someone because they're a certain person. All right, metacognition, thinking about thinking, very important. Even for teachers especially, so reflecting on own experiences and behaviours and modifying them if need be. I'll always be on children about this when I'm teaching them about why do they do certain things. They get distracted by silly little things, and I'll say, why? Do you think what you're doing at the moment is important? Why are you so distracted by, that kid over there doing something when you should be thinking about this? Directing own learning experiences and evaluating own standard of work. It's very important. I think that the students come to value their own work rather than just what someone else says about it. Breaking free of a fixed mindset. Yeah, many children think they're good at something or they're not good at something. It's not a good habit to have, I think. Better to be sort of thinking about how you can improve in certain areas. All right, from GA to thinking skills. So a lot of people are worried about this. I think there's still a good deal of overlap between the subjects. So the ability to recognize patterns, I think, is still really important. More of a focus on critical reading skills. So I would think in the thinking skills test, there's going to be more sort of focus on language and comprehension of, those questions where you have everything. You have statistics, you have language, you have to apply logic to that to figure out what is going on, and ethical reasoning. There'll be some sort of ethical dilemmas in there. Right, so I think while rote foundation learning remains vital, because even on the department website they say you still need to answer quickly. So obviously in anything dealing with numbers, you want to be quick with it. Creativity and the ability to innovate are also essential for the dynamic world of the imminent future. And my last slide was just to show how you solved that problem. So, which I've already sort of explained to you, but there it is in written format if you weren't sure how to explain it. So that was my section of the webinar where I'm doing my best to sort of explain how I am teaching thinking skills. Now, obviously, once the sample paper comes out, we will have a better idea of exactly what they're expecting. But as I said, from GA to thinking skills, and there were some questions where people were saying, well, is GA now effectively useless? I don't think it is. I think you could still practice on it. So this is another integral problem at the moment, that a lot of people think, oh, only this book will help me. I have to do this book. I have to do, this type of work. Now, use your metacognition. Ask the student, does this seem useful? What does it seem useful to be able to do these number patterns? Does it seem useful to be able to know all these synonyms and antonyms and so on? So, because if they don't see any use in it, right, well, obviously the department isn't, but yeah, then if you don't see use or utility in something you're doing, then it probably is useless, right? And you are just going through a process of learning something for the sake of it. Anyway, this video has gone on for a fairly long time, so hopefully you've heard some things of interest here. Let me know what you think in the comments, please.